Yeah, I wanted to thank you all for asking me to be a part of this. Thank you for that invitation, to talk about this. I think it's appropriate that we close out this, but also, we in a sense we're kicking off November, which is American Indian Heritage Month, and I think and also too we're closing out October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And in my presentation, I touch on that with about one of those aspects as well. All right, well, thank you. So we were doing storytelling, sustaining dialogue, and relationship building, and I think that's something I really want to talk about because coming from a community that, I grew up my whole life on the Wind River Reservation. And I think that I've always had an interest in journalism, and I would see how outsiders came into our community and wanted to tell stories, but we always called it helicopter journalism. People drop in to get the story and then leave, and that's very low stakes for them because they're not part of our community. So they don't deal with the ramifications of the storytelling that you tell. So this talks about building that dialogue and also building that relationships and how it can be beneficial for all parties involved. So who I am, so I am a storyteller who uses films, writing, and museum repatriations as a tool. I am both Northern Rapo and Eastern Shoshone. My father is Northern Rapo. My mother is Eastern Shoshone. I'm enrolled as a Northern Rapo. You cannot be enrolled in both tribes. So I am part of that nation. I also, for 2 years, I was chairman of the Northern Rapo tribe. And prior to that, I worked for the tribe's preservation office. I was the collections manager, and I did various films and different journalism activities as well. So why does storytelling matter, especially within our communities? Well, storytelling was very important because it was the transfer of knowledge from person to person. And you see a lot of documentation that isn't available about Northern Rappel culture, and that's something we take pride in because of the fact that we were able to have those meaningful connections where the transfer of knowledge was from the elder to the younger person. And if you think about it in theory, that's a relationship where you had to have trust on both sides and you had to build it over time because if not, the elder, in a sense, could be like, okay, I feel like you're not ready or you're not retaining it. We're going to end this, or the younger person is maybe not having that meaningful connection with the elder. So they're maybe able to find it with somebody else. So in theory, in the end, it was it was needed to have that reciprocation in different ways. So this is one of my favorite quotes. I always use this in different presentations, and this is from Ghost Singer, which is a great book about museums and storytelling. The cultures who created these items ain't dead simply because you're blind to them and deem them so. The people who created these things exist, they're still here. And I think that's so important because as Native people, we've always been seen as a people of the past. So people bring us out during certain times, during certain parts of history books that we are even in, but we're always relegated to people of the past. So I talked about this quite a bit before. The transfer of knowledge was very sacred within our communities, and storytelling was a big part of that. And and the big part about storytelling too was that sometimes it happened during certain seasons. There was certain times where you could tell a certain story. Our most sacred story is our creation story. And in order to fully tell that story, you have to go through certain ceremonies in order to be ready to be deemed able to retain it and also appreciate it in a certain context. So that was what our mode of knowledge transfer was going on. And then Western expansion hit. So that really changed a lot of different things for us in terms of our culture, in terms of our language, in terms of our well-beings. Colonization brought disease, warfare, and the loss of our cultural materials. And throughout that time, though, a lot of these items ended up in museums and other places too, as well, where they would interpret our items in a way that always wasn't, number one, accurate, but also number two, where there was no consultation whatsoever. So there was no means to say, hey, this is right. Hey, this is wrong. But over time, not all was lost. Self-determination was a big movement for Native people. And it kind of gets born out from the 1940s and 50s. The reservation systems really took off in the late 1800s. The Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone ended up on their reservation through the 1868 treaty, Fort Laramie, and that's where they were designated at. But there was other different things as well too, like the Dawes Act, which was an act where the reservation was chopped up. Each tribal member got a certain part of land, but then this land that the tribal people were not on, they're like, oh wait, we have this extra land. So they sold it to non-natives. So that's why you see some non-natives living on reservation land. And it's because of that. We call it the checkerboard effect. So from there, self-determination happened. The American Indian movement, which was born out of the urban areas. There was a program called relocation, where a lot of tribal members were encouraged to go live in Denver, San Francisco, Seattle, Minneapolis, and get integrated into city life. But it was a way for them to express the fact that our treaties were not being honored. I mentioned here the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. That is a tool for tribes to get back their items of cultural significance. And also, I mentioned the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act because that really sparked economic development on reservations. So just a little context too. So what is the tribal government systems of the tribes? The Northern Arapaho tribe are two separate, Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone are two separate sovereign entities. But each tribe is ruled by the General Council, which is made up of every tribal member over the age of 18. And they also elect 6 members to the Business Council who take care of the day-to-day operations of the tribe. The tribes do come together for their joint resources, which includes the land, oil and gas, minerals, courts, and healthcare. But also, this is a very key point to bring up. The tribes have the ability to give the green light to individuals who want to come do research on the reservation. So individuals who come through and want to do requests for proposals or for whatever they're doing, they go through intertribal, and that's where they say yes or no, and also give stipulations if they do, including the fact that we get a copy of whatever information or research they obtain. So today I'm gonna show you the benefits and power of building and fostering relationships through 3 case studies. The first one is the Wind River Virtual Museum, which was born into the film What Was Ours. I'm going to use a second one, which is newer to me, and that's the Summer Mobile Book Program here in Fort Collins. And the third one is Missing Murdered Indigenous People. The Wind River Virtual Museum Project. Museums and Native people have always had a tough relationship due to the fact that our material culture is in these sites where we don't, one, have access to them. Number two, the interpretations of them are 9 times out of 10 inaccurate. So there was this contentious relationship between all of that. And in 2011, Wyoming PBS had this idea. They said, we would love to do a virtual museum with some of the items that are in these museums across the country, where tribal members could access them through a kiosk and also a website. But more importantly, we would love for the tribes to, one, be able to say in their own native language what these items are, but also number two, be able to visit them. And I was brought on, this was when I was still doing my print journalism, and I was approached by PBS to work with this because they saw me as the um the conductor in a sense, who was gonna kind of get everybody with each other and be able to have a relationship that was beneficial, because they didn't want to do something where they're just going to drop in and be like, all right, let's head out. It was something where everybody felt like we're gaining something from it. So first things first was we hosted public meetings with tribal members, and that's where we asked people, most specifically elders, what do you think? What are you feeling? And right there, that was showing that we were coming at it in a good way. And in tribal communities, a lot of times a good sign of meeting a person in a good way and starting things in a good way is having a meal. So we had a meal and we just laid it all out. This is what we want to do. What do you all think and feel? And it was kind of all over the place because some tribal members felt, no, we shouldn't even be visiting these items. We shouldn't be touching them because we don't even know where they came from. Two, some people felt like they were worried about the larger ramifications of it. Like they thought, well, if we go there and we tell them what they're used for, who's to say that they're not going to use that for to write a book, and benefit all the tribes once again. And then three, there was a group who was like, yes, let's do this because the younger people need to learn about who we are. So all these voices were coming in. But in the end, myself and the film crew, which included Matt Hames and Wyoming PBS, they got to know them and they got to be like, okay, we trust you all and we feel like this is going to go good. So a little context, tribal museums have a long history here. The oldest one is in actually Oklahoma for the Osage tribe, very famous for Killers of the Flower Moon. And there's sites all over the country with them. And I love this quote where it says, the diversity that exists among tribal museums today is a testament to the many different ways that tribal communities have found to mold the concept of the museum to fit their needs and also tell their stories their own way, which I think is a very key aspect. So virtual museums have been going on for a very long time. And once again, is individuals gaining the trust of the tribes, going in and working with them to tell the stories in an accurate way. There's a very beautiful story of the Smithsonian who partnered with a village in Alaska. They went up there and they said, we would love to do this virtual museum, but also we would love to you help us rewrite the labels that are on the museums with each item. And they would basically assign an object to each student. They'd go home, work with their elder, and then they would rewrite it. And it was very beautiful because some of those elders remembered these things. They're like, I grew up with that. I remember that, and able to say, this is what this was, and this is what this was used for. But in the end, there's a really heartbreaking quote where one of them was like, we got to do all this work, but in the end, we left them there and we didn't get to bring them home. So what happens if a museum, tribal community doesn't have a museum? I think that's where a lot of these virtual museums come into play, but also where tribes can really do things differently and become sites of true knowledge transfer again. Because remember, you don't have to have a collection in order to tell a story. That's the power of having those relationships and having an elder tell a younger person, this is the stories that I grew up with. These are important virtues of what it means to be an Arapaho or Shoshone person, providing them a space and the means to be able to have that transfer of knowledge. But the very key thing that I learned being chairman of the tribe is the power of consultation. So many times we had people who wanted to do work with the tribes, but they just, here's the proposal, this is the project. What do you all think? That isn't true collaboration. Collaboration is at the grassroots of the project and saying, okay, how are we going to build this together so that it benefits everybody? So very thankfully, I was at the very beginning of this virtual museum project. So able to say the green light and say, yes, let's use that item because it will resonate, and also say, no, let's not use that item because it'd be considered sacred. And we met with the tribes and we got a letter of support, basically saying, we want to do this. What do you all think? And they agreed and they said, let's do it. So the Wind River Virtual Museum project. So that happened in 2012. A group of elders from the Shoshone and Rappel tribe went there and they got to visit the items, touch them, hold them. And most importantly, they went with youth. So they're able to show those tribal members and be like, this is what this was used for. This is what it was. This is how it was acquired. These are the seasons it'd be used at different times. And from that, they took 360 shots of each item. It was uploaded on the kiosk and also a website. And their tribal members can listen to it. Anybody can listen to it. But it's spoken in Rapo and Shoshone. And it was really powerful to be there and see that, because some of these elders haven't traveled that far in a long time, but also too, they're able to give a context of what this was. So to me and the youth there, that was important because once again, going back to our transfer of knowledge way back in the day, this was starting those relationships and this was building upon them in good ways. But also the film crew who were doing the storytelling was there and able to build those relationships as we went. This is from some of the behind the scenes. Matt Hames, and he's in the blue shirt. He was the director, and Matt really took the time to get to know our community. He became a part of it. You know, he spent a lot of off time with the families as well, and got to know what they wanted and what they didn't want. And I think that was very key. Here's some of the elders part of it as well. William C. Here's the one on the left, and the one in the striped shirt, that's Bobby Joe goggles. Unfortunately, Bobby Joe passed during the making of the film, so he never got to see it. But he was very vocal about different things, and he was very vocal about what he liked and what he didn't like. You knew, but also he was very open to the fact that like we had to capture this because this is the new technology we have, and it could benefit us in different ways. So this raises the question of who owns the material culture of Rapo and Shoshone people. I won't click on them, and I'll share this with you all too as well. But it has the links to the Wind River Virtual Museum and also the YouTube link to the trailer of the film, What Was Ours? So What Was Ours is the documentary that was born out of this. You know, I was very grateful. I was a producer of it, and also I'm featured in it as well. And this to me is the ultimate example of engagement, consultation, and follow through because this beautiful story came out of it. Because I was part of the community. Matt got to know the community and he built these relationships that stayed with it. And in the end, this movie came out in 2016 and it has had an impact that I never imagined. It aired on Wyoming PBS Independent Lens, and it really sparked a big conversation nationwide about who does own these items. I think that this was a big moment because people were watching it and they're being like, wow, you went all the way to the Chicago Film Museum. You saw these items. They're yours. Why aren't they there with you there? And that was a changing landscape. And if you all recall, in 2018, another pivotal moment happened, which I always consider. The movie Black Panther came out, and there's a scene in there where the character is in the British Museum, which is notorious for being very difficult to not only Native people, but communities across the country of things they colonized. One of the characters is in there, and he says that, like, well, this belongs to people. And a clip of the film actually ended up on the John Oliver show last year too, where he was like, what is this? You know? But it continues to bear fruit even more, and especially today. Out of it, we created learning modules. What I love about partnering with Wyoming PBS and public media is the fact that we're able to get in classrooms, which is very key. And the film was able to get in the access to as well. Because remember, they say that if a kid sees somebody who looks like them and sounds like them in certain spots, then they know it's a possibility. So that's why it's very important that we have Native people in all these different roles, because then kids look at that and they see that they can do that. So we created learning modules that was used in the classroom and discussion guides. And these discussion guides were able to hit those key points, but also be used as for teachers in different spaces as well. We also created video learning modules too as well. So here's one of them. Here's another one too as well with a lot of discussion guides, activities, suggestions. Um, and this link has the YouTube videos as well. And it all came to something really powerful. So for those of you who haven't watched the film, I'm gonna spoil a big thing. But in the film, we had a museum back home, and it was a collection that was owned by the Episcopal Church. There was a deacon during the 1930s, 40s. She bought these items from tribal members, and she just amassed a really big collection, about 250 items. um, she had them when she passed, she left it in her will that she left it at the Episcopal Church, or so we thought. Um, and they had a museum there. It was great. I heard about this collection through various different people. At the time, we were building a museum with the casino and the hotel. And we were like, we had a lot of contemporary art and we were missing that historical piece. So I heard about this collection. We reached out. We said we would love to do this. And in the end, they said, no, we don't want to do it. And their reasoning was they didn't think it was a good fit with the casino because of the gambling. But we kept pressing on, pressing on, pressing on. In the end, they agreed to do a loan of 20 items. So every year we got this loan, and it's featured in the film. And over the years, we just kind of kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it. Finally, this last year, they reached out. To my understanding, they looked at the will a little bit more and reread it and realized that when the individual passed, she didn't leave it to the church. She left it to the bishop at the time. So that bishop passed. So for interpretation, does it go to the next bishop and the next bishop? So in the end, they decided, you know what, we just don't want this mess. Here's these items back. So earlier this month, we got back those items. And it was really powerful because all those individuals were there who started from the beginning and who built this relationship as we went. And it was really a win, you know, and I'm really grateful for Matt Hames, the director, because I just really don't think this would have happened. I think it was put on their radar because of them, you know, and I'm grateful for all the people who had the tenacity to keep going forward and to tell the story in a meaningful way. So as you can see, I feel like it was not just telling a story, but in the end, we got something in the end, which is we have all these items and these artifacts that we can tell stories with. We could do whatever we want, you know, and that's very powerful. And to me, that was such a big win. And I'm just looking forward to what can build after that. So the next one I'm going to use is the Suburban Mobile Book Program. Um, I work at the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. I am the curator of collections. I started in July of last year during the heat of the summer. And then my first week here, they said, do you want to come to Summer Mobile Book Program? I was like, yeah, but what is it? And they said, okay, you know, during the summer is when kids lose their reading skills the most. We partner with the Poudre School District, Poudre Library, and also the Food Bank. And so here's Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. It's a museum that built out of two different mergers, the Children's Science Center and also the basically Historical Society. They merged, and in 2012, they came together as a Fort Collins Museum Discovery. And we get visitors from all walks of life, all roads. And once again, going to the partnership. So with the public library and also the food bank, we every summer we go out and we service over 1,000 kids every year. We as the museum do activities with them. They can check out a library from a book from the library, and then they get a free meal. But most importantly, too, as the museum, this is where we also catch these kids because we go into communities that are underserved. So we will also give them free membership. And then the goal is to roll them over to the museum where we continue to do activities with them as well. And we see kids from that program who come to us, and it's building that relationship and it's building a space where they see themselves and also where they're welcome to as well. I think that's very key because museums historically have been this place where I think sometimes people view it as very stuffy and whatnot, but this isn't the case, you know, and it should never be that way. Museums should be a place for everyone. One of my favorite things was earlier this year, we had a high school group come, and they're from a high school that's an alternative high school, you know, and some of them dropped out, and this is their second chance. And in theory, if you think about it, these are kids who sometimes people gave up on. And we gave them a tour, walked them through everything, and it was very powerful for me to build those relationships because they looked like me, you know. A lot of them were from the Hispanic population or people of color. So we had that connection automatically, and I was able to build a relationship being like, this is a space that's meant for you too as well. And these items we could tell stories about in new different ways that reflect all of us. And it's just not this little piece of history. It's continuing to grow and grow and grow. It's really powerful. And I really credit to this summer mobile book program because these kids view this museum as a place that's for them. And so the key aspects of the project is not only are they able to retain their reading skills, but most importantly, they're able to make meaningful connections and build relationships that foster future things for us as well. Because I view this as group as somebody who's going to help interpret these items for future generations. And also the focus too is to build a collection that reflects this growing demographics. So the last one I'm going to use is the Missing Murder Indigenous People movement. You know, it's if you think about it, we shouldn't even have this movement. But it's the fact that Native women and men go missing at very high rates, and sexual assault is at very high rates. And there's a different lot of layers about it. One key aspect that we find is the fact that families don't feel safe speaking to law enforcement, or a lot of times they're dismissed. So it's about relationship building in a better way. I was approached by the Wyoming Care Chambers, who works with the victim services. She reached out to me and said, "Hey, we would love to do this project." They called it an art piece. And I said, "Well, what are you thinking about?" I said, "Because I do film." And I said, "We would love to tell the story about MIP, but we want to do it in a way that I feel like was not harmful." A lot of the times with this movement, you would see the person's name, when they went missing, or when they were murdered. And that was it. No context, no anything else. And I was like, well, who were these women? You know, what were their lives like? What was their favorite color? What did they like to do? Like what was their history? What was their life before they went missing or before they were murdered? Because that's going to humanize them. So me and my film partner, Sophie Barksdale, we embarked on that journey. And the film is called Who She Is, and it tells the story of four women. And these are the women featured in the film. We worked exclusively with the families to tell their stories. And that required a lot of trust, and that required a lot of relationship building and continuing to have those relationships. And it really was sitting down and just talking to them, getting to know them in different ways. And then we would introduce the filming aspect a little bit later. So we would have the initial meetings and talk and whatnot. But then also getting a feel of people, because this is trauma for each person when they're reliving and telling the story. So we kind of had to be careful about those things as well. But in the end, I felt like we did these women justice because we told very important stories about them, but also we humanized them in ways that the media don't. And what I love about this project was that I think it got the discussion going because sometimes we took this film to, non-native communities across Wyoming. And sometimes these little towns could be very disconnected from the reservation, or they could say, well, I don't know anybody who's missing and murdered. Well, now you say you can, now these four women, their journeys as well. And having those relationships was very important, but also building it even afterwards was even more because, for one of the women, they're alive. She was human trafficked, but it's checking in with her and saying, how do you feel about things? Like, what's going on in your life right now? Like, do you need support? Do you need services? It's truly caring about them in different ways that sometimes I think as Native people, we haven't felt that way. For me, this led to the Not Invisible Act Commission. As previously mentioned, I served on this commission for a year and a half. It was assembled by Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. Deb made history as the first Native person to hold that position. Because for those who don't know, the Department of Interior is where all Native services are held, you know? So we have a direct relationship with them. And it's been contentious over time. And I served as a commission member where we had field hearings throughout the country and Alaska, Phoenix, and we heard all these people's heartbreaking stories about what happened to their loved ones, what happened to some of them, and what we need to do next to build better relationships. And the first things first was acknowledging that these things happened. And also number two, how do we come to solutions that not only can be implemented faster, but also that have that resonate in ways that facilitate healing, and is not exposing them to just reliving and telling their trauma over and over again. It's saying, okay, these are the solutions that we found, and here's how we're going to implement them. One of the first things is the fact that there's such a lack of funding. Um, Wind River is 2.1 million acres, and there's 16 full-time officers there. So if you think about it in a 24 period, that's, you have 8 people on duty, and how do you go from one area to another within 5 minutes? That's tough. But also the fact that a lot of the law enforcement wasn't trained to handle these things. And also there's an active, the statistics don't really exist for a lot of these things because Native people are often mismarked, or their tribe is not even designated. So those are a lot of things that kind of happen in different ways. So those were a lot of key recommendations. We released this report on November 1st, and we actually followed up with it in September because we had a roundtable with journalists from across the country and saying this is how you can better report Native communities. And one of the key thing we talked about was building relationships and sustaining them in meaningful ways. And also the power of terminology. For some people, you might think, well, they're Native people, just call them Native. Well, no, we take pride in being Arapaho or Shoshone, and those are key things that should be noted as well. So we had that round table and it went really well. I end with this case study because this is one where it's going to take all of us to come together and all of us to really combat it in different ways, but also how storytelling with that is still so key, because a lot of times these stories fall through the cracks. But it goes back to the fact that you gotta come to a place where it's not just a relationship that you're going to build just for the story. It's going to be for a very long time, which if you think about it, is the way all storytelling should be. We should never leave something as it is. We should always touch back on it in different times in our lives, because that shows it meant something to you, but also more importantly, it meant something to them. And to have their voices be heard in ways that are meaningful is really powerful. I think that we're at this different frontier in terms of storytelling. Things could happen very differently in a couple weeks nationally, in different ways as well too, that more different storytelling is going to happen. And I think that we're at this place where meaningful relationships is very key, not only for ourselves, but also for everybody. So I have time for questions. I took up a lot of I know, I'm sorry, but I wanted to walk you through all those things as well too. And I hope each of them resonate with you in different ways, but also I hope one sits with you a little bit more longer.